Greta Evans, Lauren Cohan, is seen riding in a traditional British taxi in the opening scene. The driveway leading to the house is secluded, surrounded by forest. When the taxi driver knocks on the window, she jumps up, having fallen asleep during the ride. Greta steps out of the limousine and gazes in awe at the manor. The limousine driver informs Greta that he has already taken her belongings inside for her while she was sleeping. He asks her to come inside and wait in the parlor before boarding the taxi and driving away. Greta enters the house and is about to enter when she realizes she should remove her shoes. She places them near the door and calls out. There is no one in the parlor and no one comes to greet her, but she hears a rustling upstairs and decides to investigate. She climbs the stairs hesitantly and calls out again. A large painted family portrait of the Heelshires hangs along the stairwell. They are clearly a very regal family. She moves on to a room filled with antique toys after hearing nothing. She picks one up and laughs briefly before being startled by a noise behind her. Malcolm, Rupert Evans, is standing at the door. He's the grocery boy who comes every week to deliver produce to the Heelshires. They introduce themselves, and he asks for her assistance in packing the groceries. They talk, and he's clearly smitten by Greta, but she remains polite. Greta is an American who has relocated to the UK for the first time to work for the Heelshires. He tells her that his grandmother can read tea leaves and his mother can read palms. When she inquires as to what he reads, he responds, with gum. She plays along by giving him the gum she's been chewing. He gives a poor reading that does not impress her. He tries again, this time claiming that she is fleeing a bad situation in her past. Greta immediately shuts down as this clearly hits close to home. He tries to brush it off, but Greta pushes past it and asks Malcolm about the Heelshires, as no one has yet appeared. He claims they are pleasant and generous. He starts to say something about Brahms, but he is stopped by the arriving of Mrs. Heelshire, Diana Hardcastle. She looks down on Greta and immediately notices her sock-clad feet. Greta claims she left her shoes by the front door and, not wanting to offend Mrs. Heelshire, rushes to retrieve them. Her shoes, however, have vanished. Mrs. Heelshire dismisses it, saying that Brahms enjoys playing. She instructs Greta to change her shoes, and they will meet the rest of the family. Mrs. Heelshire says on the way that she hopes Greta works out because they have tried other nannies in the past. Greta is much younger and more attractive than the others, so she hopes Brahms will like her. They can hear Mr. Heelshire telling Brahms to behave before they arrive at the parlor. Greta realizes Brahms is nothing more than a lifelike porcelain doll when Mr. Heelshire stands up. They introduce her to Brahms, and she just stares at the doll in disbelief before laughing, thinking it's a joke. Her amusement is short-lived, however, due to Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire's solemn expressions. Malcolm, on the other hand, steps in and informs the Heelshires that their food has been packed and that he will return next week. He walks past Greta and shakes Brahms' doll hand, telling him that he will see him next week. Mrs. Heelshire smiles adoringly at the interaction. Malcolm leaves, but not before shooting Greta a look that says just play along. Greta takes the doll's arm and says, forcing a smile, that she hopes they can be friends. Mrs. Heelshire takes Greta on a tour of the kitchen, explaining that they never throw away leftovers. They set up a special area, some sort of portable fridge container off to the side. Mr. Heelshire leads her outside and tells her about the traps they have around the house to catch vermin. He doesn't believe it's necessary, but Mrs. Heelshire is concerned about rats in the walls. He also mentions that all of the windows have been painted shut, as if by accident, but it doesn't sound like it. Mr. Heelshire has a serious moment with Greta at the end of the walk and tells her that things are not always as they appear on the outside, or something like that. It's meant to reassure her. Mrs. Heelshire states in the study that music was very important to Brahms. Throughout this, she holds and coddles the doll, which Greta finds repulsive. Mrs. Heelshire places the needle on the record, and loud operatic music begins to play. Mrs. Heelshire tells Greta in the bedroom that she is to wake Brahms up at 7 a.m. every day and change him. She wants Greta to do it, but because she's a doll, her movements are clumsy. Brahms is put to bed by his family. The Heelshires pray as Greta watches from the doorway. Mrs. Heelshire approaches Greta and requests privacy. Mr. Heelshire closes the door behind her. She can hear the two talking quietly for a minute before the door suddenly opens. Mrs. Heelshire tells her, tremblingly, that Brahms has chosen her. Greta talks to Sandy, a close friend or sister, from home in her room. She tells her about the terrifying situation. Sandy agrees that it is strange, but encourages her to persevere because Greta needs this second chance. This is followed by Sandy saying that Cole has stopped by her house again, asking where Greta is. Greta begins to panic, but Sandy assures her that she has not told him anything. Someone from Greta's troubled past. The next day, Mr. Heelshire explains that he and his wife are going on a mini vacation that they have wanted to take for a long time but have been unable to do so due to the lack of a carer for Brahms. It is critical that you follow these rules, they tell Greta. They give Greta a printed schedule of activities to do with Brahms throughout the day, as well as a list of the rules. Some of them are: there are no visitors, no boyfriends. Don't hide his expression. Freeze leftover meals. Every morning, he gets dressed. Never enter the attic. Assist with your studies. Never, ever cover his face. Read a bedtime story to your child. Play loud music. Never, ever leave him alone. Clear out the traps. Remember to feed him. Good night kiss. Mrs. Heelshire hugs Greta and tears up before leaving, strangely whispering to her, "I'm sorry." Greta puts Brahms on a chair and apologizes before tossing a blanket over him as soon as they leave. Greta makes herself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and pours some wine because there isn't much else to do in the house. She disposes of the food waste in the garbage. She settles in the parlor to read some magazines. It begins to rain outside. When she refills her drink, she walks past the covered doll a few times. She goes upstairs to bed and looks down the hall where the doll is, but the blanket is no longer on the doll. She's a little unnerved, so she hurriedly places the doll in the bedroom and locks it. Greta goes to bed but awakens to the sound of a child wailing. She grabs a candle and goes downstairs to investigate. On the way, she looks at the portrait, focusing on Brahms' painted human face. When an arm shoots out and reels her in, she leans in close. Greta awakens in a cold sweat. It had all been a nightmare. She hears the muffled wailing noise once more. She peers into Brahms' bedroom, and the doll is exactly where she left it. She leans in close and notices the doll's cheek is wet, as if from tears. Greta is officially terrified, but she notices water dripping from a ceiling leak. She just laughs it off. When she walks out into the hallway, she notices an attic in the ceiling and tries to open it with a large fire poker thing leaning against the wall, but is unable to get the latch to come down. There's a knock on the door, which she ignores. Malcolm has arrived, apologizing and bringing Greta's first week's pay in an envelope. She tells him she wishes he had warned her about the doll, but he says he doesn't know what to say. They go for a walk around the manor, and Malcolm takes her to the actual Brahms grave. He lived between 1983 and 1991. According to Malcolm, not much is known about Brahms, who died in a fire on his 8th birthday. Soon after, the doll appeared, and Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire have been caring for it the entire time. Greta feels immediate sympathy for Malcolm and observes that Brahms would have been Malcolm's age if he had lived. She can't believe Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire have been living like this for the past 20 years. We get the impression that someone is watching them from the house during all of this. Malcolm invites her to leave the house tonight to escape the oppressive manor. Greta is hesitant, claiming she just got out of something, Cole, but Malcolm persuades her otherwise. She agrees, and they part ways, planning to meet later. Later, Greta begins getting ready by picking out clothes while talking with Sandy. Sandy is relieved that she is progressing and informs her that she requires this opportunity. Greta mentions the doll's backstory, and Sandy tells her once more that she needs the money, which she accepts graciously. Sandy reminds Greta that 1 week's pay is more than Sandy's weekly salary. Sandy also brings up Cole and how persistent he is. Sandy reveals that Cole asked Sandy's 10-year-old son where Greta is so he could write and apologize, and her son replied that Greta is in the United Kingdom. Sandy apologizes, but Greta assures her that nothing from Cole will be read. We are focused on Brahms' porcelain face in his room, and we realize he can hear everything because there is a system set up in his room that amplifies the sound so the doll can hear everything. Greta is getting excited about going out. Before entering the shower, she places a coral dress and her necklace in the bathroom. Something pulls the dress and necklace away from her as she showers. Greta exits, wraps a towel around herself, and examines herself in the mirror. She notices that one of her hair ends is a little tangled. Before she can get too worked up about it, she notices that her belongings have vanished. She rushes into her bedroom to discover that all of her drawers have been opened and all of her clothes have been removed. She spins around when she hears something. The attic is open, and the stairs have been descended. She grabs the fire poker thing on the side and climbs up, clutching her towel. The ladder lurches up and the attic slams shut as soon as she passes. She can't get it open. She notices Malcolm's car approaching and attempts to attract his attention. He can't hear her because she's so high up. She bangs the iron poker against the walls to make noise, but it's far too quiet for him to hear. She can just make out his face through the thick wooden planks. Remember, every window is pretty covered up or shut. She keeps trying until he leaves. She looks around dejectedly in the dark before a figure appears in front of her. She is startled and falls back, knocking herself out. Greta awakens in the morning. She turns around to see that the figure that had startled her was simply a suit hanging against the wall. She also notices that the ladder has been lowered and the door has been left open. She summons Malcolm to sweep the house. He looks up at the attic stairs, which he barely touches before snapping upward and closing. He believes this is how she became trapped up there. They have some fun together and play pool. They go to the study to talk, and she inquires further about Brahms. Malcolm isn't entirely at ease, telling Greta that there is people talk and pub talk, and that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. According to popular belief, Brahms was a very nice young man. According to popular belief, Brahms was extremely off. Malcolm tells Greta about a time when he came over on Brahms' birthday. Mrs. Heelshire was opening presents with the Brahms doll while Mr. Heelshire was drinking heavily in the study. Malcolm was about to leave when Mr. Heelshire approached him. Mr. Heelshire was muttering something about how he couldn't go on like this any longer, the doll thing. Malcolm took advantage of the opportunity to inquire about Brahms, the real Brahms, to which Mr. Heelshire simply replied, "Odd." Malcolm wants her to leave again, but Greta assures him that everything is fine. He goes home for the night, and she goes to bed. She calls Sandy again and leaves a message for her to send more magazines or anything else over because the manor has no internet, TV, or anything else electronic. She hangs up, and the phone immediately rings again. She picks up the phone, thinking it's Sandy calling back, but all she hears is breathing. She hangs up, shaken. She goes through the motions the next day and notices the doll in bed, where she had left it all that time. The list of things she's supposed to do with Brahms on a daily basis is nearby. Outside, the phone abruptly rings, and when she answers it, she hears the same breathing. This time, a small tinny voice, like a child's, calls her name and invites her to play. She begins to cry and scream, demanding to know who this is. When she hears footsteps, she rushes to her room and locks the door. The porcelain feet can be seen walking across the floor from the bottom. Greta laughs hysterically as she hears Brahms calling her out. She notices something being placed down and goes outside after a while to find it is a tray with a PB&J sandwich. She picks it up and bursts out laughing/crying. She looks across the open room at the Brahms, where the doll is now sitting on a bed, facing her. She walks up to the door and stares at it, then looks at the list, knowing exactly what Brahms wants. She looks after Brahms for the next few days. She converses with him and prepares food for him, throwing it as instructed in the container. She listens to his music and basically follows the list. On their journey, we cut to the Heelshires. Mrs. Heelshire is writing a letter to Brahms to apologize for abandoning him. "The girl is now yours," it says at the bottom of the letter. They walk along the beach, picking up rocks and putting them in their pockets. They walk together, drowning themselves. Malcolm arrives earlier than usual to deliver the food one day to check on her. He notices the doll sitting with them at the table. Greta looks over at the doll, thinking she better not say yes to him again. Malcolm accepts it and takes Brahms' hand in his and asks to take Greta out, also playing Brahms' approval in response. Greta is only looking and is not at ease. She then begins to inform him that Brahms is present. Malcolm is skeptical, so she takes him upstairs. Greta appears to have been experimenting. In Brahms' room, she positions the doll in a sitting position on the ground. She erases her previous lines with chalk. She makes a rough outline of the doll. Malcolm still thinks it's crazy as they return to her room. She says she got the idea from him mentioning how shy Brahms was in real life. As a result, the doll will only move behind closed doors or away from view. They pause for a few beats. Greta bangs on the wall, and they return to Brahms' room. She left the doll exactly as she found it. Malcolm assures her that everything is fine and that he believes her. Greta wants to give it another shot. She hugs the doll and says she needs Malcolm to see it so she won't be alone. She also says she'll have to leave if he doesn't move, and she needs Brahms to do it for her. They return to her room, and the doll is no longer there. Malcolm is taken aback. Greta is overjoyed that she is not alone in her feelings and that she is not insane. She hugs him ecstatically, and they almost share a kiss when she notices Brahms creepily staring at them from behind the door. She picks up Brahms and compliments him on a job well done. Greta and Malcolm talk as they walk outside the grounds. They believe it is a spirit in the doll. Malcolm is still disturbed, but Greta says she understands the Heelshires better now. She discusses her past and her long relationship with Cole, who was occasionally abusive. She became pregnant but miscarried when Cole became violent with her. She can empathize with the Heelshires because they, too, have lost a child. Malcolm consoles her, and the two kiss. They return inside to her room. They begin kissing and lie down on the bed, presumably with the intention of making love. We see something through the keyhole, and before they get too far, they hear music from another room interrupting them. They proceed downstairs and discover the doll in the study. Greta notices he is unhappy and returns him to his bed. Malcolm is worried. He tells Greta about something he kept hidden for 20 years because he didn't want to scare her. Every week, there was a girl who would play with Brahms. On the day of his death, the girl went missing while they were playing. Brahms died after the house burned down. They discovered the girl's body in the woods later, her skull completely crushed. Malcolm isn't sure if the doll contains a good guy ghost spirit. Greta is confident that Brahms will not harm her. She asks Malcolm to go home for the time being. Remember the no guest rule? You wouldn't hurt me, would you, Brahms? Greta says as she puts Brahms to bed. Greta is making breakfast the next morning when she hears the billiard balls clacking from the study. She grabs Brahms and walks over, thinking it's Malcolm. Cole here. Greta informs him that he should not be here. He chastises himself for only wanting to say hello to the child. Greta clutches Brahms to her protectively, and Cole realizes it's a doll and laughs. Greta admits that she is paid to look after a doll. She prepares dinner and seats Brahms among them. Cole describes how he found her a job at home. He keeps getting sidetracked by the doll's stare. Malcolm appears, and he and Cole engage in a brief standoff. Malcolm pulls her away from the table by asking her to look at the groceries. They discuss Cole, who should not stay here because he will hurt her. Greta denies either scenario and assures him that she will handle it. Malcolm bids Cole farewell and departs. He doesn't leave, but instead parks outside and keeps an eye on things. Greta brings him blankets and pillows, which Cole interprets as him not sleeping in her bed. Cole painfully holds her and tells her he will never let her go again. He expects her to be packed and ready to leave by the morning. Greta sobs and departs. Greta hugs Brahms as she puts him to bed. She sobs softly that she needs his assistance before going to bed and falling asleep. Cole awakens in the middle of the night with blood on his head. He stirs and yells for Greta. When she comes downstairs, she sees a slew of rat carcasses from the traps and a bloody message that says "Get out" written on the walls above. Cole believes Greta did it, which she strongly denies. They then spot the doll in the corner, and she runs to him, saying, "Brahms, what exactly did you do?" Cole becomes angered and grabs the doll. Greta retracts her statement and attempts to convince Cole that it was her fault. Cole appears to believe the doll had something to do with it, especially since he has been bothered by it since the beginning. Malcolm hears the commotion and runs in to see what is going on. He notices Cole swaying the doll. Greta is agitated, and they both try to take the doll from Cole. Cole eventually deliberately smashes the doll into the ground, shattering it into pieces. The walls begin to shake and the house begins to groan immediately. They are all beginning to panic. Malcolm wishes to leave, but Cole restrains him. Cole presses his ear against a wall mirror, following the noise as it fades. The mirror shatters and something bursts through the walls. It's a massive figure wearing a porcelain mask over his face. Malcolm concludes that it must be Brahms, who did not perish in the fire, but Greta is skeptical. Brahms goes for knock down Cole right away. Malcolm and Greta try to stop him, but Brahms pushes them aside and stabs Cole in the neck with a broken doll shard. Brahms tries to yank Greta away, but Malcolm knocks him down, lifts Greta, and they flee. Greta and Malcolm approach the front door, which is barred by Brahms. He's looking for faster ways to possible escape routes. They dash upstairs to her room, locking the door behind them. Brahms is standing in the doorway. Greta discovers a panel in the wall, and they both walk through it. Greta discovers some stairs that lead up to a small room beside the attic. It is old, has a fridge, and very basic living quarters. On the bed is a patchwork, life-size figure that is a fabric doll dressed in Greta's missing coral dress and jewelry, with her locks attached to the head. We now understand the truth. Brahms never died. He's insane, probably since even before murdering the girl. He's been living within the walls for 20 years, and Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire have done everything possible to keep their son. They used to communicate with him via the doll. Greta discovers Mrs. Heelshire's letter and realizes that they are abandoning her to care for him indefinitely. She bursts out laughing as she realizes the adult Brahms is watching her every move, while Malcolm tries to find another way out. He finds one and has Greta go through first, followed by Brahms. They've crawled through a section, but there's a hatch that leads outside. Malcolm tells Greta to move on as Brahms follows through with a larger shard in his hand. Greta doesn't want to abandon him, but he runs at Brahms to keep him at bay. Brahms is enormous and towers over Malcolm. He slams his fist into Malcolm's head, knocking him out. Brahms approaches Greta, telling her to stay in a small child's voice. She eventually opens it and leaps through. Brahms can't catch up because he has to crawl and screams after her, now in a more adult voice, that if she doesn't stay, he will finish off Malcolm and kill him like he did everyone else, Cole, the girl, and the nannies he rejected. Greta sprints towards the gates before coming to a halt and turning around. She is facing her abuser, and she wants to save Malcolm. She walks to the door, pocketing a long letter opener she discovers. She walks over to Cole's body, where Brahms is standing. Except for his eyes, the mask completely covers his face, with large tufts of facial hair visible around it. Greta tells Brahms that she promised him she would return and never leave, so she is keeping her promise. Brahms reaches for her, but Greta stops him with her nanny voice, telling him it's time for bed. It sets off a chain reaction in him, and he obeys. She puts him in bed, and he whispers a kiss, but she pulls back, saying no kiss is punishment. He grabs her and says kiss again, this time more forcefully. Brahms begins to pull her closer as she presses her lips to the porcelain mask. She stabs Brahms in the stomach with the letter opener. He recoils and tosses her against the wall. Greta almost passes out as he strangles her, but she manages to grip the letter opener and push it in further. Greta rushes past Brahms to the hidden pathways to see if Malcolm is okay. Part of Brahms' mask is shattered, and we see the burned skin underneath. Malcolm is awake and has large contusions on his face. She gets him out and they drive away from Heelshire Manor. The final shot shows someone painstakingly reassembling the doll. Brahms is, presumably, still alive. He then looks into the camera, as if nothing has happened. Please subscribe my channel. Thanks for watching this video.